Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Let's bring the council meeting to order. We're in a council process committee meeting, and I'd like to receive a motion to approve the receipt and the agendas and the on table.
Move receipt, Ferguson.
Ferguson receipt and seconds.
Froze.
Mayor Froze. Okay, I'd like to go right into B, items for discussion. The following item was referred from May 11th, 2020 special. Oh, I have to vote. Who is not in favor? Who is opposed?
I'm opposed.
Okay, Councilor Richter,
I'm opposed because I don't think the on-table item should be in this meeting. I think it should be in a regular council meeting. But
Okay, I'm going to take that as Councilor Richter opposed for the on-table. And so I'd like to, we've got that recorded. I'd like to move along for items for discussion. The following item was referred May 11th, 2020 at a special council meeting for further council policy direction. B1 Hub Langley, file 055007. It is, I'd like open it up for discussion. I don't see any hands.
Sweet.
Okay, I don't see any hands on here. Do you see any hands? Okay, Council, we'll go first with Councilor Arneson. Now, Councilor Arneson, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. This council agenda item, I believe, is here from my perspective because of its timeliness, because it was initially came forward most particularly due to the COVID distancing constraints that we have. And so I do have, actually, if any staff is available, I do have a question for staff. I have read the email in response to the original inquiries, but I did want to know, I have a couple of specific questions regarding the township response to this request.
Okay, what's the question? So I'll direct them to staff.
Oh, okay. So what I wondered was, further to this request, I know that it had very specific wording. So I'm wondering if staff had looked beyond the immediate request of specific roadways to be closed and had identified any possible, I'll call them lesser used roadways that could substitute for the ones that are within the requested ask.
Okay, that question I believe would go to Raman. Mr. Raman Steffi, could you reply, please?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff did consider the request seriously, and there have been a number of factors in going to the preparation of the response that was copied to Mayor and Council, which Councillor Arneson just referenced. Of particular, I guess, importance are the following highlights. The first one being that where this road reallocation has been successful and has been utilized has been in major urban centers, and the ones that have been brought to staff's attention, or at least that staff is aware of, have been referenced in the document, in the response. And when I say major, I mean really major, including, places like New York and other places across United States. And the only ones that staff is aware of are the major urban centers in Winnipeg and elsewhere. That was the major finding. The second part was the fact that, notwithstanding the question from Councillor Arneson just now, the other sections of roads specifically identified by the group as part of the email communication are roads that are subject or part of the major road network, the regional major road network, what we refer to as MRN. And as such, any amendments that would impede traffic would have to be approved by TransLink. And the third factor that went into staff presentation or the preparation of the response was the guidelines issued by the province concurrently with, I guess, the peak of the current pandemic in terms of municipalities considering reallocation or potential reallocation. And that was the need for guidelines to be followed as put forward by the province, including the taking down and the installation of barriers to make sure that there's adequate public safety in terms of the barriers not impeding with traffic when the traffic flow is at its highest. So those were the major factors, and they remain still the same today. They were issued, the response, as Councillor Arneson again noted, was issued back in April. But the concerns, if anything, have in fact, I guess, somewhat increased based on the fact that the traffic volumes appear to have picked up from the peak of the pandemic and the lowest or the least, the trough of the traffic volumes. So if anything, the traffic volumes have increased, which would make the issue even more concerning to staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saifi. I very much appreciate that. I do have a secondary question then, because I do take your points that larger urban centers may be more amenable or well-placed to be able to do this because they are the ones that have been referred to. Also, the idea that now that some time has gone by, there's more traffic back on those same roadways, and that the engineering and safety concerns that you've referenced would be even more in play. But what I'm wondering is, since some time has gone by, there is a different notion that's come forward, and I think it might be more in keeping with what could be a compromise situation. So I'm wondering if staff is aware of the Safe Street initiative that's been undertaken in Vancouver, which is a bit of a hybrid model where it has elements of the roadway that are more or less enhanced for the purpose of pedestrian and cycling, but not completely constricting or restricting vehicles and emergency vehicles. So that is something I think that, from my perspective, is not in any way addressed by the original motion, which strictly looks at these larger street networks.
Okay. Do you have any comment on that, Mr. Stafey?
No, but Mr. Chair, thank you. No further comments. Staff is aware of other initiatives, but I think, again, most of those initiatives are perhaps best suited to major urban centers with significantly higher populations and densities.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for clarification, Mrs. Bauer, I don't see any numbers. You say that it automatically goes into an order because I don't think I see the order here. I just read from the top down? Okay. That doesn't always work though, because I know at the last prior meetings, sometimes I was waiting. Okay, I'll do that. Councillor Long, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. My comments were actually going kind of fast. This is our first policy meeting, I suppose, and there was an issue already with the agenda. And if you look at the referral of this, I was the one that did not support sending it to here, because if this is a policy session, I failed to see where this COVID initiative became a policy. And whereas the other item that apparently is being objected to, where a policy of how we fund festivals is probably more of a policy issue than this. But I guess that's just my comments, Mr. Chair. It doesn't belong here. We should have just voted on it at the time. And but I agree with all the comments that have been put forward. It's going to be very problematic to initiate what's being asked for. But I just wish it had been dealt with at the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a policy, council process committee, and this is where we should be working on these problems. And we are, so.
The problem is the process, not necessarily this item.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you. Councillor Richter, your comments.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, I do think it's a policy issue because I think it's all about active transportation. And I think that probably part of the feedback that we have received during this COVID period is people need more recreation options, particularly people with younger children that want to get them outdoors into the fresh air. And when the parks weren't open, they didn't have a whole lot of choice. I mean, some of the parks are open now. But I do note on page 4 that the top paragraph is very clear. The province has provided guidance on how temporary closures could be implemented and recommends the closures be done during daytime hours only and would require the installation of advance warning signage for vehicles, barricades, cones and delineators, signage for pedestrians and cyclists, potentially electronic arrow or message boards, all of which would have to be installed at the beginning of the day and removed at the end of the day. It seems to me these provincial requirements are quite prescriptive, and I'd like to know what the cost of them would be. For example, how many employees would we need to be going out and doing this twice a day? What is the average wage cost per hour per employee? How many hours would they need per day to do this? And I'm also wondering if it's possible, and I appreciate that the roads that were originally requested were MRN roads, which would make it a little more difficult. But I'm wondering if we could reallocate as a pilot project another road. And the one that pops into my mind is Allard Crescent, because we're getting quite a few complaints about people speeding along there. And Allard Crescent is a wonderful rural road that I think would be ideal for a pedestrian walking and cycling trail. So would we be able to convert Allard Crescent on a pilot project basis, say 3 months, and try it out to a full-time cycling and pedestrian route? So those are my questions. Cost, number of employees, looking at a pilot project on another non-MRN road, a road that the township controls in its entirety. Thank you.
Okay, Raman, Mr. Steffi, could you maybe some comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in no particular order, the estimated costs, it is very difficult to provide council with something at this point because frankly, it hasn't been analyzed to the point that, you know, I would feel comfortable giving council a specific number. But having said that, as Councillor Richter was asking the question or posing the questions, I was trying to understand the length. It seems to me that the lengths of the road specified in the original email amount to approximately 4 kilometers. There's about 2.5 kilometers along 88th Avenue that's been requested, and about 1.5 kilometers along 216th, and somewhere in between, I guess, 800 meters to a kilometer on Walnut Grove Drive. I would imagine it would take about an hour for a crew of 2 or 3 to do each section. So translating that would be about 3 or 4 hours times 2, about 6 to 8 hour equivalent full-time staff time. And you multiply that by an average of, I think the correct number, Mr. Backen can correct me if I'm wrong, or Ms. Sinclair, average, I guess, about $40 or $50 per hour, including all the benefits. So that's about the methodology that one could come up with in terms of estimating the costs and the time.
Okay, so just so you're saying 6 to 8 hours, would that be a total for both setup and tear down?
That would be just for the setup. And
just for the setup. So we're looking at 16 hours a day. So that's like basically 2 additional staff persons, correct?
That's correct, approximately.
Okay.
Yes.
So we would have to add 2 new employees just to do this.
Yes, again, just high level estimation.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if we converted an entire road, we wouldn't need those daily staff costs, would we?
Well, that was the second part of your question,
Yeah.
Councillor Richter, through the chair. If council was to direct staff to proceed with another non-MRN road, then that could be done on a more, I guess, permanent basis, if that's the desire of council. And in which case, the cost that we just talked about would not be an issue, would not be a consideration, because again, it would not be on a daily basis, but rather, potentially monthly or seasonally based costs.
And if we tried this on a pilot project basis, would staff be able to bring us back a list of potential roads that we could investigate, like township roads that we could investigate for this conversion on a pilot basis to keep the cost down?
Through the chair, Councillor Richter, I think for staff to be able to meaningfully present council with some options, it would ideally have a bit more of a framework or criteria in terms of the objectives that is council's desire to achieve, in terms of whether it's pedestrians, whether it's something to assist the businesses, whether it's something to provide more connectivity or more use of the roadway to say cyclists. So I think certainly that could be something that staff could do, but ideally would be accompanied with some more definitive framework by council.
Okay, so council would need to give a more specific direction around such a pilot project, if I'm hearing you correctly.
That would be ideal. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Saifi.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions for staff through the chair. I heard Mr. Saifi suggest that that urban centers have been more successful, or that it works better in urban centers to have these sorts of reallocation of roadways into bike lanes. I'm wondering if maybe Mr. Saifi, you could just sort of expand a little bit why that's the case, that urban centers are more effective, because it seems to me that there would also be a greater demand for vehicle traffic at the same time, and wondering why urban centers seem to be better or more suited for this kind of thing.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, the reasons for why it has been more successful in urban centers have different factors that go into the evaluation of success and what may constitute success. But primarily those that I mentioned earlier regarding population and density of population, and the fact that the urban centers do actually have either on the ground or structured parking available. So surface parking is not an issue in terms of reallocation of the road to, I guess, other uses, displacing otherwise on-street parking provisions or allowances. And the fact that businesses don't necessarily rely on those parking spots. These are the ones that come to mind. And the fact that it's really a question of, I guess, at what point would something become cost effective in terms of providing a benefit? Again, we have not done the cost benefit analysis, but one would imagine that with the higher density and higher population, there would be a higher level of benefit that's being provided on a per household or a per capita basis when you reallocate a certain piece of public infrastructure to another use. So.
Right. Okay. Well, that's helpful to know. So one of the, it seemed to me when I read through the information that was provided to us in the request from Hub Cycling and so on, it seemed to me that there was a concern, certainly for better cycling options through sort of developed areas or through more of the urban centers. So, I'm not sure that it's so much about having roads available out in the country, as many of those roads have wide shoulders and opportunities to ride, but it seemed to me that the concern was maybe more along in our urban centers. So for example, the one request was to go along 88th between 202 and 216th, which, and a much busier area. But I'm wondering, and maybe this ties in a little bit with Councillor Arneson's question earlier, but it seemed to me that Telegraph Trail is a trail that is a road that comes up into 216th. And as it crosses over 216th, it seemed to me that it would be a road that would be quite much better suited for cycling than would be along 88th. And to go, across in front of the school that's there, and it goes all the way to 208th. And I'm wondering if there's strategies, or maybe these things are already being done to try and make some of these inner roads maybe a little more accessible to cycling, such as Telegraph, rather than trying to choose a very busy road like 88th as a place to make cycling paths. So it's maybe a question to staff to just expand again on some of these other options, maybe Telegraph and some others, to help cyclists get through the urban centers. And maybe what are some things that maybe are already being done to try and help, and enhance cycling options for people.
Okay, thank you very much. Good points. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Councillor Whitmarsh had a question there. I know that I guess I would ask the question then, or Mr. Safety or somebody from your team putting together. There is currently we have a biking system or some sort of a network that you've worked with the folks in the cycling community. Is that not correct? And I know we've even had things like the Fondo. Now, mind you, that's an organized event, but cycling and folks cycling, that's the township of Langley is an attractive place to go. I see them, they're going by our houses every day. If I may, through the chair, can you comment, Mr. Safety?
Yes,
Mr.
thank
Stapey.
you, Councillor Ferguson, through the chair. Indeed, we do have a plan. It's a long-term plan because, as you can appreciate, Council is aware of the costs of implementing I guess, a very ambitious cycling network for an area that is as large and vast as the township of Langley's, with the hundreds of kilometers of road that we have. It costs a lot of money, and we do leverage TransLink funding to be able to assist us with implementation of the plan. And every year on an annual basis, we do put forward requests for improvements, whether it's dedicated and protected cycling paths where feasible in certain areas. Again, all of it based on the plan that has been adopted by Council.
Well, I also wanted to point out, I just thought about it now. I mean, of course, we're talking about safety, and we're talking about recreation safety, roads. We're talking about a lot of things, and I think it's important to get some sort of report from you. But something that's really, really hitting the interest levels now are e-bikes, and those are folks, probably folks like myself that aren't that great a shape, but they can use these e-bikes and pedal as well. And I believe the market is really expanding. Perhaps, Mr. Safety, are you or your team, are you so much preparing for that wave, the next wave, if I may, through the chair?
Thank you for the question. Yes, of course. We're always trying to plan for a future scenario based on the best information that's available to us through whether it's the public health agencies or the practices of other municipalities, not just within the region, but across North America.
The final comment, it's not a question, it's to all of us, is basically we have to be very careful on our roads closing and making sure that we have a balance, because I look forward to a report from staff, because it's very a real challenge shutting down roads. It's hard to believe even the smallest roads are the most, we think of the less used roads are certainly a real transportation route for many of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Mrs. Coates, Councillor Coates, please.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. So the only other thing that I might add to that report would be, what would it look like if we tried a Friday night to Sunday night version of, maybe shutting down, a road that could be used for Saturday and Sunday, which would then make it so that the staff would only have to put the barriers up on a Friday night and then take them down on a Sunday night so that they're ready to go for the week. And just, what would that look like if that could be like a trial run? Because I guess the only concern I have is definitely safety when you're shutting down these they're major roads, and people drive fast and they get frustrated, like, what are we doing shutting down a road? But I do hear that, over and over we have, e-bikes and e-scooters and little kids on e-scooters on sidewalks, and it's pretty scary. I see it all the time. So it is something that is coming in the future, and I think that might be a good thing to sort of have a look at. Yeah, so that's all I would say about that.
Thank you very much. Mayor Froese, your comments?
Thank you. Yeah, interesting discussion. I want to point out we do have a cycling plan, and Mr. Steffi said, that's a plan that council's approved. It takes years and years to implement the cost. And just recently on 248th Street, I see that there's a dedicated cycling lane that would is designed, I guess, eventually goes right down 248th and 240th. They've done some extra work. A lot of work is being done to assist cycling in the township. Allard Crescent, I know a couple years ago, staff were out there adding cycling lanes, widening, the asphalt along that road. There's also the Metro Vancouver Park, which has a shared use path, which is beautiful for cycling right across there. So there's a lot that's already been done. And, this report stemmed from, the early days of the COVID lockdown when traffic was lighter. Now, I drove down 88th yesterday and it seems like we're right back to normal again. So I think it's, been a good discussion, but I really can't see anything more coming out of this. I think we're already doing a lot in the township. We already have a policy in place. It's already being funded over years. It's not easy or cheap to do, but anything we do is going to cost us more. I think great idea to do in the weekends, but now we're tackling overtime with staff. So bringing people in on the weekends, maybe we can avoid that. I don't know, but really, I think what instigated this report, that time has passed. I mean, now we're back almost normal. People are using the roads again, and I really don't want to burden staff with more work on another report when we already have a cycling plan, and we are working aggressively to get that done. I believe several years ago, council approved more funding, annual funding to that, to speed it up. So those are just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Froese. Batrina, Councillor Arneson, second time. Councillor Arneson, are you there?
Sorry, I forgot the mute. Yeah, so further to all of this discussion, I do take these points as all being very viable, and I do sense that there is a movement towards trying to identify some area of the Township of Langley, including specific roadways that would be amenable to this. There are challenges, obviously, and there is a cost that's attached to that. I understand that this motion was precipitated specifically because of COVID. However, it occurs to me that we are advancing in the Township of Langley a climate action strategy that's highly dependent on finding and identifying alternative ways to get around other than cars. And I know it's a challenge because of how big we are geographically and pockets of urbanization, but I think I would prefer to start working in that direction. And pilot projects, to me, are a highly viable way to get empirical information as to whether or not something is successful. Otherwise, we're kind of shooting in the dark, projecting, hypothesizing about whether or not it will be utilized. I notice we don't do that with our bicycle network, which is a 50-year trajectory of what we're planning to do, because what we recognize is that this is something that needs to happen incrementally as we have the money and ability to go forward with that infrastructure. So similarly, what I would say here is that this is an ideal situation that's being brought forward to consider, further to Councillor Whitmarsh's point, I think about Telegraph Trail. Would that be an opportunity for an interior or lesser used roadway currently to provide information on what that looks like, what the cost is, and how it can really serve that local community? We always refer to us being a community of communities. And even though this came from Walnut Grove, I see there would be great advantage to try and consider a broad range of this approach. And I also focus not on the fact that these streets are absolutely going to be closed, but there are restrictions as to traffic on the road. So I don't see it particularly as a hindrance or necessarily as inherently dangerous, because what's really dangerous is people trying to get out on their bicycles and being in a very marginal situation vis-a-vis no bicycle lane potentially in their area whatsoever, and then trying to seek some safety on the sidewalk, which then further imperils pedestrians and others. So I think that this is a really good opportunity to do that, and I'm hoping that we will put forward a motion so that we can get a further report back and look at opportunities to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richter, second time. Your comments?
Yes, if council is ready, I'm prepared to put a referral motion to staff to prepare a discussion document for council around the framework and costs of a 3 to 6 months pilot project on a municipally owned road.
Okay, can I just before I take that, I haven't made any comments. I'd just like to ask Mr. Steffi. He had mentioned it would take some time if we were to implement anything, any three of these. It would take time from TransLink to get back to us. Could he maybe just clarify how long it might take if it sounded like we had to pass it through TransLink to begin with? Did I understand that right, Mr. Steffi?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. On certain roads that are identified in the regional plan or the regional system as major road network roads, then we do require TransLink approval. So as an example, 88th Avenue and 216th at the locations that were specified, those are MRN roads.
Okay.
However, the other two that were referenced, they're not. And I think that's the distinction to be made. In certain cases, we do require other levels of government's approval, and in other area circumstances, we do not.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. My comments, everyone has said a lot of good things. We do have a long-term cycling plan in place. This has actually been stemmed, temporary road realignments, so it could relieve pressure on trails paths and multi-use paths around the community to keep residents safe and to continue the Langley Township COVID-19 recovery response. So I'm thinking that by trying a pilot project, we're getting a little off the track of this item, but which is fine. No problems. I don't have any problems that way, but I'm just wondering if we're dealing with two issues here. One is a temporary, hey, let's get this going tomorrow type thing to keep everyone. And the other is let's get a report back from staff to, if we take Councillor Rick, we will take her motion. We're having two different issues here. So those are just my comments. Councillor Long, I'm going to listen to you on your second time, and then I think we've had a good discussion. I'm going to go back to Councillor Richter's motion, or Councillor Richter, and hear her motion. You're the last speaker on the list.
Okay,
Thank you.
Discussion's been good, but I think it's revealed some very important points. First of all, it needs to be in a highly populated urban area for it to be successful, in my mind. In other words, you've got a very, very busy, well, let's say, an area with a large population of people who want to get out and walk and cycle and enjoy the streets. So the suggestion of, I'm sorry to say, the suggestion of these other streets, which are in more rural areas, doesn't fit the bill. I'd be very leery of doing anything on Telegraph Trail, especially since that's right adjacent to 316th, where the interchange is going to be open. But I think if it's going to be a successful project, it has to be in an area that has a large population. And it's been pointed out by Mr. Safey that as being on the major road network, that's a whole other issue. So I'm not so sure. Just whenever this motion comes on the floor, let's keep those points in mind. There's no point in finding a nice quiet street where it's not going to bother anybody, because that's going to create more problems.
Well,
with the bill. And the other thing is, yes, we have to keep an eye on other levels or orders of government for their permissions. And I guess the other thing is, when I heard the time frame, it's probably something you wouldn't want to do in the winter. So the time is running out in that respect. I thought I'd make those comments so that whoever's going to make the motion would do so in a way that could be supportable. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Richter, did you want to read your motion if you're still considering it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it forward and see what happens. Again, I'm going to go back to the Allard Crescent one. We know we've got an issue with speeding traffic there, and I think if we perhaps made Allard a circular one-lane traffic for cars, and then the remainder for bikes and pedestrian use, that would be accessible to our most populated regions, Walnut Grove and Willoughby. I'm also concerned about a second wave of COVID perhaps coming through. And if we need to shut down our parks again, it would be nice to have something that we could put in place to provide that outdoor recreation opportunity for residents. So I would just like to make a motion that I guess if we pass it here, it goes back to council. Council debates it again at council. That council asks staff to prepare a framework for a 3 to 6 month pilot road or pilot project on a 100% municipal road, which would involve conversion to bike and pedestrian access, and as well as being fully costed out. I mean, these ideas are exciting ideas when they come forward from the public, but as we all know at this table, there is a cost attached to everything. And I think we need to go into this with eyes wide open, knowing what the costs are. So that's my motion, a framework for a 3 to 6 month pilot project on a 100% municipal road, fully costed, which would convert that road to pedestrian and cycling use.
Okay, do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Arneson. Okay, we've got a motion on the table here now. I'd like to go to Councillor Long. Go ahead.
Can be 3 or 6 months. It sounds like it's either 1 meter or 2 meters, apart. It should be one or the other. But keep in mind, if you say 6 months, we're not going to have this happening until at least August. You're recommending that the road be closed to pedestrians and cyclists in the middle of winter. So I think maybe the movers should consider making it a 3 month pilot project. Or 6 months, there's going to be a whole bunch of unintended consequences, I would think.
Well, just as a point of clarification, I'm thinking that it's probably going to take staff at least a couple of months to get back to us with the framework, which we then have to review and debate and decide on. If we went with a 6 month, we could maybe say open it in March and close it in October before the bad weather. If we went with a 3 month, we could look at a shorter time frame as necessary. But my intent with the 3 to 6 month is that I don't want a pilot project that's going to run longer than 6 months. We should just try it, see if it works. If it works fine, then we need to consider making it a permanent structure. If it doesn't work or it's not well used, then we just forego the whole idea.
Okay, good points. Mayor Froese, your comments, please.
Thanks. So just a couple points. Are 100% township roads. Well, even the MRN roads are 100% township roads. It's just that we have to, they're part of the major road network. So I'm unclear if this would require still a request to transit, because that doesn't say in the motion. The other thing, if there is a second wave, hopefully there isn't, but based on the first wave, the parks were never closed. Cyclists, joggers, walkers could still go in the parks, and that was always the case. We hadn't closed them before, and I don't know if we'd be closing them in the future. As I said, we already have a plan. We're already spending money. I mean, I see it all the time driving around the roads in the township that money is spent by the township to enlarge our plan and to do a pilot project for something we're already doing. To block off lanes of road, I think we need to concentrate on improving cycling infrastructure as we're doing today, continuing to build as we build new roads to add proper bicycle lanes. And as we're already doing, retrofitting the older roads and picking those that are more strategic, like I mentioned, 248 and 240 as an example, because it's going on right now. That's being built. But there's still a cost to have staff do this report and come back to us. And I don't see us doing this. I think we already are doing a lot, so I won't support it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Just
Mayor,
as a point of clarification on that, if I may, Mr. Chair.
I'll see if I can clarify it.
Yeah, the intent is a non-MRN road because that involves too many complications, I think.
Yeah.
So when I say 100% municipal road, maybe we should add in there non-MRN road, which I'm happy to do.
Okay, we'd have to, yeah. Okay, thank you. Mayor, Councillor Coons, your comments, please.
Yeah, thanks. Through your worship to Mr. Safey, would a report like this already exist, sort of, or like, are we duplicating information or work that is being done currently? And what would a report like that cost? I just mindful of that.
So you, Mr. Chair, no, a report, as I understand it, as currently being discussed by council, is not something that staff would be working on. And in terms of costing, it really depends on ultimately what council's objective is, whether there is a need for what I've been referring to as a cost-benefit analysis or not, or whether it's just the actual cost of implementing council's direction. And it's a question of what is the best suited location, in which case the question would then have to be answered as to what is exactly the objective of council. Is it to assist better movement by cyclists, or is it to assist with pedestrians, or is it to assist with businesses in terms of more, I guess, more enhanced environment for business activity to be conducted. So depending on those, it is something that staff could undertake within a matter of 2 or 3 months, and the costs would not be significant if it's just a staff analysis and does not require involvement of a consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Whitmarsh, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting motion. I certainly am an advocate to see cycling be improved in our community, but my question still is around, whether this is a request from Hub Cycling and others for improved rural cycling routes, or whether this is a request to improve cycling through our more densely populated urban areas, such as Walnut Grove, or whether it's Aldergrove or Brookswood, the densely populated areas, because that makes a big difference to me. If we're just talking about improving a rural road and making it more cycling friendly, I probably wouldn't support this pilot project. If it's around how do we, could we, outside of our current cycling plan, improve some cycling within our more densely populated areas so people can get around Walnut Grove and other areas safely, then I'm more open to that. But I'm certainly not open to taking our busiest streets, the ones that are most heavily used by vehicles, and closing down lanes. That doesn't make any sense to me at all, but it does make sense to me to find some alternate routes that go through a city center. If that's what this is about, then I may be more open to it, but I'm certainly not supportive if it's meaning just improvement of rural, because I think we already have a great plan to improve the rural roads in our area, and we're already doing that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson, don't forget your mic.
Yes, thank you. Oh, well, thank you, Councillor Davis. I think that we have a motion on the table. We're sitting in a CPC meeting. Just a clarification to the staff. Now, this is a motion that would go back to open council to ratify, if I may. Is that the procedure?
Yes, that's correct. I'm getting the
Okay.
link.
So now I'll talk about the fact that, I agree with what's been said by some councillors. In fact, the fact we need to look at the more densely populated areas where the folks are living and where they're taking their bike out of their house or garage and heading the streets. I remember having a discussion years ago about in the larger urban areas we have expanding shoulders, making lines, putting the trails together in conjunction with the cycling community. So that's more of what I would see is something with this, not going back into the rural community and looking like that, where we have routes and everything else for cyclists, although we can always improve on that. But it's the higher, more densely populated areas. I think that's important. That's something I see is something staff should be looking at.
Okay, thank you very much. I see no speakers on the list. My comments is, I think if we were to ask Hub whether they wanted it in rural or city, I think they'd say both. I think that it's a bicycle thing. You get on your bike, it doesn't matter where you are, you can connect. I just wonder if this motion in a way is hijacking the COVID-19 problem, and we're taking it into an area where we're you know what, maybe hijacking was the wrong word. I just think that we're not dealing, this was brought here for the COVID-19 crisis, and now we're going to experiment it. So I think it will take some time, and I just wonder if, although a good thing for cyclists, but every time I see us working up in Willoughby, I see roads getting wider, bike lanes getting better, maybe not fast enough for Hub, but just my comments. I do have another speaker, Councillor Long, for the second time.
Yeah, thanks. Speaking to the motion now, it was an extremely verbose motion. I have no idea really what it says, and this happens quite a bit where they're so wordy. I'm not sure if I can support it or not. I hear discussions about rural and urban, but I will take us back to the original email of April the 29th. And you're right, Mr. Chair. This is specifically a COVID-19 response, which is why it should have been dealt with instead of being heard. And I think they were looking, while reading over the email again, it was looking for an immediate response to open up a couple of major streets in the major urban center of Willoughby and Walnut Grove. And that's not what this, I don't believe that's what this motion is discussing. And I'm just wondering, maybe as you're the chair, maybe you might suggest that seeing how it has to come back to council anyway, if staff maybe haven't heard enough from us and got some direction to perhaps bring back a recommendation to the next council meeting that could be accompanied by potential motion, I'd feel more comfortable going that way. And that explains why I can't really see myself supporting what's on the table now, considering I don't even know really what it is. Thank you.
Okay, I'm thinking now if we did that, Hub Langley would say yet another meeting. So I think we have a motion on the table. I think we have to vote on it. And we have to vote. Is there any other speakers before I call the question? Okay, seeing none, I would like just those that oppose. put your left hand up and say
Rose
opposed.
opposes.
Okay.
Opposed.
Davis, Blair, Ferguson, Froze, Long. Oh, is there any other ones?
Kunst.
Kunst. Okay. Did we get that recorded? Yes. Okay. It fails. The motion fails. Mr. Backham, now what do we do now? Okay. Okay. Now the next item on the agenda is it was on table, and it was regarding file number 1850-20, subject letter of support for Langley Jazz and Art Festival. Mr. Backham, I'm going to mute, and I'd like you to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we're sensitive to the placement of this item on the agenda, and perhaps a bit of an explanation would explain because the circumstances are evolving. This appeared on the agenda because late last week we received a communication that left us with the understanding or perception that if a letter was not forthcoming from the township by Friday of this week, with a, and this is a bit unclear, but with some indication of support and potentially financial support, the opportunity for a federal grant would be lost for the entity. That's what precipitated it being placed before you, because of course this was our last chance to have a council discussion at least prior to the deadline that was perceived to be this Friday. Of course, our next meeting being Monday. That being said, though, some questions were asked and answered, and Mr. Tulumello was worked fairly diligently on this matter over the weekend and this morning, trying to track down some of the concerns, and he's presented to you on table then a more fulsome question and answer. And if I'm to summarize that question and answer, I think I would say it this way, that it appears there was a misunderstanding, that there is no need for a letter of support to the extent that it would preclude them from receiving any federal level funding. It appears that the confusion exists that they may be seeking clarification as to council's support or non-support. As such, then, if we were to do nothing, it would not affect their funding. If we were to send a letter of support without any representation as to funding, that would be sufficient. If we were to send a letter with representing that there was some funding, that would all be just suitable. The remaining issue then, though, is for council then, does it wish to process this matter here or process it at a subsequent meeting? And secondly, Mr. Tulumello may have some comments in terms of what he's hearing out there, because it doesn't seem that that there was a full understanding of this matter at all, and as such, that if council were, for example, not prepared to provide a letter of support, that would also be satisfactory to the extent it wouldn't affect their funding. I know there's been some additional concern expressed with the community association asking for a return of some funding because of the COVID environment and the perils that they're facing financially themselves. The information that we have is that they've not confirmed to us that they have been unsuccessful in recovering those funds. But the last word that we heard was that they had made a request and that the funds were not being returned. And that may or may not affect council's decision ultimately if they wish to provide a letter of support or not. Mr. Tulumello, did you wish to add anything to that summary before council can deliberate?
Mr. Backham has provided a good snapshot of the reality of the situation. I just want to echo that in my conversation with the Canadian Heritage. They did confirm that the grant to the organization is not conditional on a cash contribution from the Township of Langley. Basically, it is conditional that the Township of Langley is supportive of this event within the community in general. In-kind support can be expressed, and verbal support is very indicative of what is required by the federal government to continue supporting festivals like this in our community.
Okay. I'd like to open this up now for discussion. Councillor Richter, your thoughts?
Yes, and I want to start by thanking Mr. Backen and Mr. Tumalello for the extensive feedback that they've provided on this today in the memo that was sent out. Question number 2 on page 2 basically says, in further conversation with the representative of the Canadian Heritage, also made staff aware that no letter of support or explanation is required from the municipality, and feels that there may have been a misunderstanding in their communication with the Fort Langley Jazz and Arts Festival. So basically, I'm interpreting that to mean we don't have to provide anything. They're still going to get their $230,000 of funding this year from the federal government, which is good news. I did raise what I think is a policy question, and that's why I suppose it's good in front of this committee right now. I'm a little concerned about township support being leveraged, for lack of a better word, to get higher level grants. And in order for higher level grants to be forthcoming, we have to put money or something into these events. And I don't think our hands should be tied in that regards. And I think it's wrong if our hands are tied in that regards. And I think we should be trying to get clarification from these other funding agencies about whether or not this is an axe that's left hanging by them over the heads of the federal grant agencies, that if the township doesn't put money in, then they're not going to get money from other sources. I also think that it's a question of costs. I mean, it's clear that the Canadian Heritage funds up to $200,000 for these events. If that kind of money is available from the higher level governments, I still don't understand why we need to be putting $5,000 to $10,000 of property tax money into events like this. So I think there is a policy discussion that needs to occur around our grant process. I think that people who are applying for township property grants should be specifying in their application, if they are going after higher level grants, how much they are going after, and whether or not them getting those grants is conditional on our support. And if it is, what kind of support is that condition? So this has opened a whole new realm, I think, of considerations we need to address through our policy. So it's kind of opened up a loophole, if you would, from my perspective. But as I said, I don't think township should be held to account if we aren't aware that we're being held to account on this. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long?
I don't understand the previous comments. Levering grants is what it's all about. And when we grant funds to organizations, we always encourage them to go for other orders of government and other sources of funding to help make the event happen. And if we support the event, we support the event. I guess I'm confused about a couple of things, and I take great exception to one point as well. But I'm very confused about the comments of Mr. Tulamelo, because he said that he spoke to somebody on the phone and said that the letter would be a good idea, but in the document it says that a letter is not required. The whole concept of a letter started with a certain councillor asking that question in the beginning. So I guess we need to get clarification if there's a letter required or not, so that we can make a decision today. The second part, and Mr. Chair, before you allow a bunch of discussion to occur, I don't understand where this whole issue comes between the Fort Langley Hall, Community Hall Association and their organization. This is simply very inappropriate that emails are sent by councils making certain allegations of which I know anything about. And here it is all of a sudden on our agenda, and here staff are getting involved, and it's really not our business. So that is very much a strong point. I'd like to hear what other councils have to say before you allow any discussion to happen on these questions. And I'm not even sure where these questions came from. This is one council that's got some kind of a query going on, question 1, question 2, question 3. I mean, very simply, Mr. Backen explained that with a deadline that if we don't catch the deadline, we're going to lose some federal funding for an event that we've been supporting over the years, or at least the last year. And we need to find out today if we have to send a letter or not. And I don't think anything else should be discussed at this time.
Okay. Good points. That's the way I took it too. Both Mr. Tamela and Mr. Backham, in my opinion, said that we didn't have to send a letter. We could or couldn't. So I think that's what we're going to find out. So
well, then I'd like to make a motion that we move on. We got lots of.
Well, I know. I want to listen to what Councillor Kuntz has to say. Councillor Kuntz, please.
Yeah, hi. So as far as the, other levels of government and getting grants, I know that's it's just how it has always worked from where I've been sitting, because they want to see collaboration from the community, and no grantor or person who's giving the money wants to be the only source. So they want to see that collaboration in the community. So I think only because it's COVID and only because they are now doing virtual, otherwise we would have supported this really wonderful event in the community. So I hope, it's kind of taking, in my opinion, it's taking away a little bit from what we really want to do is we want to support this event. I kind of agree with Councillor Long. I don't think we have any business commenting on whether they're going to give money back, and just let them figure that out between the two associations. But that's all I really wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Okay, I'll be brief. The Fort Langley Jazz Festival is a great event. I went last year, and I didn't bring my guitar because I didn't want to ruin the event. But I think that when you apply for grants, you apply for as many grants as you possibly can with organizations I'm involved with. We just keep applying, and sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. If they don't need a letter from us, that's fine. But I agree with yourself, Acting Chair Davis, and some others that have spoken as well. I think it's time to move on, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Backham, do we just receive this? We just moved on. There's been no action. I haven't received any action from any councillor. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The matter is effectively been received as part of the agenda. So unless there's any further direction of council, either here or by it being raised at a subsequent council meeting, we would propose to not take no further action on this matter. It would be at an end. But if council has any direction, again, either here or at a subsequent meeting, that could form our direction.
A point of order, Mr. Chair. Can we get clarification? We heard we need a letter.
Councillor Long, sorry, you went in and out with your voice. Could you repeat the question, the clarification?
The point of clarification is, do we need a letter or don't we need a letter?
Through the chair to Councillor Long, a letter is not required at this point of the grant. A letter of support is required when a group makes an application to the organization, to the federal government, and that was done in September. That was the confusion of the point. They thought that they needed another letter clarifying the township support, and that is not required.
Okay, so we've clarified that. Okay, so I'd like to move on now. Is there any other business? Okay, I'm going to just delay for a second here in case somebody, okay, no other business. I'd like to now move into resolve into special closed council proceedings. So I guess we have to now move into them. So we need a motion to move into special closed. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Councillor Long.
Councillor Long, second it.
Second.
By Councillor Whitmarsh. Okay, so now we need to do we need to receive the minutes? Or okay, anybody opposed to that? Hearing none, Okay, now I'd like to receive the, okay, I'd like to have a terminator. So somebody, there's a termination. Councillor Long, second it. Councillor Whitmarsh, you're gonna second it? Good. Okay, Councillor Whitmarsh will second it.